Hello everyone, my name is Tom Holton. This is Christ's Wondrous Words, and today we're looking at Genesis chapters 18 to 23 for Come Follow Me. And it's Come Follow Me, Old Testament. The key question we're asking today is anything too hard for the Lord? That's the great question that three holy men put to Abraham when they go to meet with him, and he presents them with some food and drink and wants them to rest from their journey. And they asked if his wife Sarah was there, and of course she was in the background, and Abraham, heard the announcement from these three holy men that Abraham and Sarah would have a son. And the Bible tells us that Sarah laughed at this idea, and that Abraham and Sarah seemed surprised to hear this glad news. Obviously they've been promised a bounteous posterity, particularly Abraham and Sarah. Abraham had children with his other wives, but that Sarah would have a son. And the phrase in the scriptures is that she laughed. And whether you interpret that to meaning she was gleeful at the news, or whether you interpret that to mean that she didn't believe it, or she thought it was a joke, or she thought it was impossible, there's an interesting lesson to be learned. This idea that the promises of the Lord can seem counterintuitive, they can seem almost absurd, sometimes they can seem unbelievable, incredible, amazing, and hard to digest, hard to conceive of how they might come to fruition and how they might be possible. Abraham and Sarah were men and women, a man and a woman of God. They were true and faithful, righteous, faithful disciples, but they were tested. I think it's a wonderful encounter that Abraham and Sarah have with those three holy men, because they took care of them, and of course the holy men told them that they would be blessed. The identity of those holy men is not given to us, but they were clearly messengers from God, and God had a work for them to do, and he had a promise to keep. He had an appointment with destiny, and that destiny was that Abraham and Sarah would have a son, that Sarah would give birth in her old age to Isaac. Isaac would in turn have a son whose name would be Jacob, whose name would be changed to Israel through his faithfulness to God. Israel would have 12 sons who would become the 12 tribes, the 12 families of Israel, the 12 houses of Israel, from whom would come the Messiah, from whom would come Moses, from whom would come essentially the covenant people of the Lord, through all generations of time and into the eternities. So, would Abraham and Sarah believe? Would they be faithful to the promises of the Lord, even when those promises seemed amazing, incredible, preposterous perhaps? And we know from Abraham, in the Pearl of Great Price, the book of Abraham, that we are here on this earth to be tested, to see if we will do all the things that the Lord has commanded us to do. We are here to see if we will prove faithful, if we will do the hard thing, do the inconvenient thing, do the uncomfortable thing, because anyone can be faithful in favorable circumstances. Anyone can be faithful when things are going great, but to be faithful when it seems impossible, to hold on when it seems unbelievable, when it seems difficult, that's what they were being asked to do. And of course they were faithful. They were blessed with a child, a special child called Isaac. The promise of the Lord was fulfilled, and the promise didn't stop there. We know that Abraham and Sarah were tested because they were told to offer up their chosen son, their beloved son, to offer him to God. This was obviously a test, but it was also a learning opportunity. It was a test of faith and faithfulness. It was a test of devotion. It was a test of trust. But it was also an opportunity to learn and grow, to understand, to come to know the Father and the Son, Jesus Christ, more fully. Because obviously this Abrahamic moment, this Abrahamic test, and this test for Sarah, obviously, and Isaac, was obviously a test of monumental proportions, but it was a test which was in similitude. It was a symbol of the sacrifice of our Father in heaven and his only begotten Son. And that has merit, because in that similitude, in that symbol, in that type, there is learning. There is a message being communicated to Abraham and Sarah, and a message being communicated to us, that we are to come follow him, come follow God, especially when it's difficult, especially when it's hard, especially when it's inconvenient, when it breaches expectations, when it tests us beyond our normal limit, or beyond our comprehension, beyond our rational understanding, beyond our ability to explain or foresee how the Lord might bring about his purposes. And the Lord, of course, has power to do amazing things. We go back to that question: is anything too hard for the Lord? If the Lord makes a promise, can he fulfill it? Can he bring to fruition his promises, even though those promises seem without basis? They seem beyond the bounds of reasonable expectation. They almost seem counter-rational. And this is a great test. It's a test for all men and women. Abraham and Isaac went up to the high place, and Abraham proceeded to offer his son Isaac in fulfillment of the words of the Lord, the directions of the Lord. Abraham knew that he was being commanded of the Lord. He knew that this was a divine revelation. He knew that it was a divine instruction. Didn't necessarily understand the meaning behind it, didn't necessarily at that time understand the reasons, perhaps didn't see the full comprehension of what this was to represent, and perhaps didn't fully realize how the Lord would bring to pass the promised blessing of him being a multitude of nations through Isaac, having a huge posterity of righteous people through a son that was to be sacrificed, that was to be killed. But of course Abraham also realized that this was pleasing unto God, not to destroy, but to show faith, that life could come from death, that rebirth could come from disintegration, that faith would lead to newness of life in dire circumstances, in circumstances where it seemed impossible, inexplicable, and unjust. And so Abraham had that sense of trust, that sense of confidence, and that confidence and trust had been built over a long period of time through repeatedly believing God and trying to do the things he was asked to do. So he was willing to sacrifice Isaac. He believed that God could raise him up from the dead if needed. So Abraham shows this understanding, this trust, this faith, maybe not a complete recognition of every single way that God would perform his work, but an acceptance that God could do his work and would do his work, that God would not be found wanting, that Abraham had been called to the test and he had to meet that challenge. He made a choice. He made a covenant choice to be faithful and to do what needed to be done. He didn't have to sacrifice Isaac, but he was willing to do so. And that's the key, that willingness to give up all things for God, to put God first. As we know the story. He didn't have to sacrifice his son. An animal was provided in the stead thereof. An animal was sacrificed, and Isaac went on to have children, and Abraham became a father of many nations. He's called the father of the faithful. He became a father of multitudes, and not just multitudes of people, but multitudes of the great and the elect and the noble. And in fact, all covenant Israel comes through Abraham, are known as his seed. And we have to be adopted in, or we have to be born into or adopted into the family of Abraham. We have to be covenant heirs, not simply through birth, but through the ordinances of the everlasting gospel. We have to be made heirs like Abraham was, to these great and faithful promises. And the restored gospel, of course, allows us to do that. So, Abraham and Sarah were faithful. They were true. They faced tests. They faced difficulty. Was it easy for them? No. Did they always pass the test with flying colours? Probably not. Like most of us, like all of us, in one way or another, we struggle to rise to the level that God expects for us. But over time, over education, over humility and submissiveness and experience, we become willing to do what God would have us do. So that's what they did. They became willing, and they obtained the promised blessings of the Lord because they were faithful. And faithful means to be full of faith. It means to be faithful, to have at least a measure of faith which grows into a fullness over time, to be compliant, to be obedient, to be willing. And willingness is such an important thing. So Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, they were faithful to this cause, to this destiny, to this conviction, this commandment of the Lord. And we can see the blessings that have come through the Abrahamic covenant, through the Abrahamic promise to all the nations of the earth, that the great work of the gathering of Israel is happening through the heirs of Abraham, through the sons and daughters of Abraham, either by physical, biological birth, or those who are grafted in, those who are adopted in through spiritual rebirth. But either way, the covenant of Abraham is a covenant of righteousness, a covenant of responsibility. It's a covenant of service. It's a covenant of duty and love. We also know in these chapters is the story about Lot and about Lot's wife, and Abraham and Lot, and their story is a very interesting one. We know Sodom and Gomorrah, that the Lord wouldn't destroy it if there were sufficient righteous people found therein, but there wasn't, and so it was destroyed by fire and brimstone, fire from heaven. We know that Lot's wife looked back to see what happened, of course, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. And the idea being that what we seek for is what we become. We gravitate towards that which we love, that which we desire, that which we imitate, that which we long for. And so Lot's wife sought for Sodom and Gomorrah rather than the promised land, the kingdom of God. And there's a cautionary tale there, because obviously Abraham and his good wife and Sarah, and obviously Lot, their focus was on something different. Lot struggled, but we are all tempted, we are all tested, we are all given tribulation and temptations and triumphs if we're faithful. If we struggle, we will struggle. We can struggle in a righteous way. We can struggle to overcome the snares, the obstacles, the roadblocks that life puts in our way. But God wants us to succeed. He will help us to succeed. He will prepare the way. He will magnify our abilities. He will strengthen us. Abraham and Sarah were asked to do hard things. So was Lot and his wife. And so are all others who seek the covenant path. The covenant path is the path of eternal reward. It's the path of eternal service, the path of eternal duty and loyalty and effort and happiness. It's the path of peace. But that requires a sacrifice. It may not always be the sacrifice we think it will require, but it will require a sacrifice. Ultimately, a sacrifice of a broken heart and a contrite spirit. Ultimately, the sacrifice of all earthly things, reputation and time and money and talents, and to consecrate these to the Lord, to give all that we have and are to the Lord. That's the plan, that's the purpose. So in these chapters, we really learn that God has the power to do his work, has the power to do all things, but he works through us, and that requires that we come to a sense of belief, a sense of trust, a sense of faith in his promises. And that means overcoming doubt. It means resisting the temptation to be cynical, to be impatient, to be demanding, to be feel feel entitled to demand an explanation or to demand a blessing on our timetable. The Lord works on his timetable and his plan, and we can align to his plan. Brothers and sisters, how grateful I am for Abraham, for all the prophets and apostles of covenant who are faithful to their covenant, who are tested and keep trust with God, who allow God to improve them, who allow God to stretch them, to teach them, to educate them, who don't judge God foolishly or charge him incorrectly or doubt him excessively. We may all have moments of wonder, moments of doubt, moments of despair, but with God's help we can come to believe, and believe in a secure, settled, peaceful way. We can come to be at rest with our faith, notwithstanding tribulation, notwithstanding persecution, notwithstanding whatever the errors of the past have been, or the contingencies of a moment, or the circumstances we endure. We can come to have that solid, settled faith. I'm grateful for these things. I hope and pray that we will follow God, follow Christ, when it's hard, when it's difficult, when it's challenging, when it's inexplicable. For then we will come out on the other side of that transition, that journey, that transformation, through difficulty, through complexity, through uncertainty, and we will come to a more settled, assured faith where we realize that God fulfills his promises, perhaps not in the way we'd intended or we'd expected, but in his way and in a beneficial, marvelous way that will delight us, that will help us. And it's important to remember that so many of the promises are for time, but so many of the promises are for eternity. So we ought not to get confused. We ought not to think we demand a promised blessing now in mortality, when that blessing may come in the eternities, but it will come. The promised blessing will come. It's important to remember that for those who would love children and don't have them, the Lord has said in the eternities they will have children. For those who long for spouses but don't have them, if they are true and faithful, in the eternities they will have them. So all these blessings of family, of posterity, of eternal love, they are the blessings given to us through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, restored in these last days through the prophet Joseph Smith. They will come to us, either in time or in eternity. For that we can be confident. I'm so grateful for these wondrous, beautiful, inspiring truths. Pray that we will be faithful like unto Abraham, that we will develop the kind of covenant faithfulness that he had. As we do so, we will know rich and bountiful abundance.